Cool. And I see your screen share too. Awesome.
Okay,
Awesome.
cool.
All right. Hey, thanks so much for agreeing to do this, by the way.
No, no worries. Thank you. Wait,
Yeah,
so can you see myself and the screen right now?
I can see both right now.
Okay,
Yep.
perfect.
And
Perfect.
we are officially live. Everybody who is in the audience, give us a shout if you can see Justin. Justin right here. Justin is leading our 2 p.m. talk on how to get your first listeners. And so, with that, Justin, I'll let you take it away.
What's going on, everyone? I'm super excited to be here. Thank you, Ish, for having me on. And really, when it comes to getting your first listeners, this can be really like the hardest part of a podcast, right? Because everyone kind of focuses on the thousands and the millions of possible people that could be listening to your podcast. But if you don't get those first few listeners, does it really matter? Because you're never going to end up getting to that thousands and millions of people anyway. So I thought that it was great that Ish reached out to me to come on and just talk to you about how to get your first few listeners. A majority of it is about social media, which I know Benjamin is going to be talking about later on. We actually had him on our podcast earlier, I think a year and a half ago. So I won't dive in too deep about social media, but I'll touch upon it a little bit. Just want to say hi to everyone who's saying hello. So, hey Jay, hey Renata, hey Mulaney, Kenny, David, and so on and so on. I'm sorry if I don't mention your name. Everyone is saying hello. I really appreciate all that. So let's get into it. Basically, first off, I want to talk about who I am. So my name is Justin Nguyen. I used to be a UCF LinkedIn campus editor, and I graduated from UCF December 2018. And during my time at UCF, I was really trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. My freshman year, I was an athletic training major. I was going down like that stereotypical Asian path of becoming a doctor. But what I realized is that really wasn't my forte. And I transferred into becoming a finance major. And that's what sort of led me to the GetChoGrindup movement. And with GetChoGrindup, what we're trying to do is really bridge that gap for students of going to college and into the real world. So we produce a lot of content online, hence the two podcasts that we have right now, as well as a lot of my LinkedIn content too, which currently I'm getting about 200,000 views every single month right now. So it's been really interesting to see sort of my whole journey get flipped upside down over the past few years, because I never would have thought that this is something that I would be doing right now. It's actually insane. But I want to talk a little bit about the Get Your Grind podcast and then talk about the declassified one. So the first Get Your Grind podcast, why we started it was because we wanted to talk to young Gen Z people and really understand their mindset of how they were becoming so successful at a young age. So that's why we've had on Benjamin, who you'll hear from later today, as well as Jordan Paris. And what we talked about was we wanted to figure out why they got into what they were doing and really get into the real knit and grit of what it took to get there. Because interviewing, let's say, a Mark Cuban or Elon Musk, hearing their story is great. But the thing is, they're looking back on 10 to 20 years ago on what they were doing when they were 19, 20, 22 years old. And might be some things that were lost. So that's why we wanted to talk to the next Elon Musk, the next Joe Rogan, the next Mark Cuban, so that we can get the real knit and grit, so that people that look like me, sound like me, and that are around my age can really understand that side of things. Now, fast forward to now, and we've started a declassified college podcast. And with that, what that whole thing is about is we're really trying to showcase all of the secrets to when it comes to graduating college and reaching success. So what that means is like how to get your first job, how to get your first internship, how to network, all of these questions that we had when we were in college. We answer those questions in this podcast, and it's very short form. So most of these episodes are 5 to 10 minutes. And what that sort of leads into is we have our longer episodes where we bring on someone to interview and we talk about, so we've had someone who talked about scholarships, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, with all that, what we're trying to do is build an audience, and that's where the podcast kind of came, because it was so cheap to get started. And I'm sure that's what you guys want to move into. So we'll jump into that right now. So who are your first listeners? Many people will think of the first three, right? It's your family, your friends, your network. But that very important one is other. Who are the other? And that's what we're going to be talking about here. But first, we have to talk about the beginning steps of creating a great podcast. First is your friends and family. These are the people that are closest to you. But you have to keep in mind that when you're asking them for feedback, you have to take it with a grain of salt, because we know our parents love us and we know that our friends love us. And with all that comes with biased feedback, right? And what I mean by that is they might say that your podcast is really great because they want you to succeed, but it might not necessarily be the truth. And as much as we hate that side of things, it's something that we have to understand and slowly move forward to. And that's why the next portion, which is the networking side, is super important. These people are going to be your initial audience. They're great people to get feedback from, especially the people that you don't necessarily day, but the people that you might talk to every couple weeks or every week or so. And the reason for that is because those people are a little farther from you in terms of they can be more honest with you and more real with you, so that you can get real and true, credible feedback from them. And that is very key when it comes to creating a great podcast, because you don't just want to hear what people want, or you don't want to hear what you want to hear, right? You want to hear what you don't want to hear so that you can end up getting better at all those things, whether it's sound quality, saying like, etc. too much, whether you're pausing too much, your editing's off. Your parents and your friends might not necessarily know that, but someone who has been in the podcast game for 5-10 years might know that and will actually tell you those things. And those might be in your initial network. And that brings us to other. So who are they? And probably, again, the most important question that you're here that you wish that you can find out is, how do you find them? And you're going to need to go over these 4 things and figure these 4 things out before you can get to the other. First one is producing fire podcasts, then building your first 100. That's when you can really focus on social media. And then the last bit is the internet. So producing a great podcast. The reason that you want this to be the reason that you want to focus on this is because when you start promoting your podcast, you want it to be something that's good. And what I mean by that is when you just getting started and you think your podcast is amazing, you're just pushing it out, you're probably only going to hear good feedback from your friends and family, because they want to support you. They want you to do well. But as you start to really dive into it, you can hear, oh, maybe that intro wasn't as good as I thought, or that closing wasn't as good, or that sales pitch at the end, or that ad wasn't great. And so you can start to nitpick and get a little bit better every single time, because when you're reaching it, let's say you have an interview show and you're reaching out to someone and you ask them, hey, can you promote my podcast after? And they have a large audience. During the podcast, it might sound great. And they're like, yeah, of course. But then they listen to the edited version after and they're like, oh, this isn't actually up to the quality that my audience is sort of used to. So if they feel that way, they're not going to promote the podcast. And if they don't promote the podcast, then you don't get to hear from their audience. That's the biggest problem that I see with a lot of podcasts. And what I've run into a lot is people will bring me on to their podcast, and the conversation during the talk is great. It's amazing. We're going back and forth. It sounds great, but you're in the moment and the adrenaline's just rushing, and that's about it all. As it starts to go and they send me the edited version, I listened to it before and I'm thinking in my head, this is what we talked about. I don't even remember talking about this. This doesn't sound that great. And I don't really necessarily want to promote this to my audience because it doesn't make me look good, but also doesn't make the podcast look good. And I don't want to make you look bad too. So that's when it comes down to never becoming that one-hit wonder, right? You don't want to become the person that goes viral for this one thing and it's great and it's amazing, but then other people start diving into your content and then they just see that it's all bad stuff and they don't end up subscribing and they don't follow you and they don't leave you a review. And it doesn't matter if it's just a one-hit type of thing. You want consistent growth over a long period of time. So think about it. If you're thinking about YouTubers, right? How many viral YouTube videos are there? A ton. There's, I think, like 300 hours of content uploaded to YouTube every single minute of the day. And there's always bound to a video that goes viral. And how many times do we never hear about that viral creator again? A lot. But Mr. Beast, maybe you've heard of him. Every single video that he created last year had over 10 million views. That's what you want to build. And he's been building that for years. I think he's been on YouTube for about 6 or 7 years now. It's been building up to that point where he can consistently hit 10 million views every single time. And he absolutely exploded onto the scene last year. That's what you want your podcast to be like. You don't want it to be a one-hit wonder and then everyone just forget about you. You want to be this person that is consistently remembered because you're producing great content every single time, and you can last a very long time too. Now, the next thing is a concept that I talked about earlier. Everyone is looking for thousands, but no one is working on those first 100. And again, those first 100 can be extremely hard to get because if you're starting from zero, you might not necessarily know 100 people that want to listen to that specific podcast for an extended period of time, whether your episodes are 5 minutes or 3 hours long. It's a time commitment on the other end, whether it's a friend or family. It's different from a Facebook post or an Instagram post where they just have to like it and share or something. They have to take their time out of their day to listen to it. And you're taking time away from whether it's their job, whether it's their family, whatever it may be. And so you want to make sure that you're focusing on those first 100 people and taking their feedback strongly. Because if you can't get 100 people to convert and listen to your podcast consistently over an extended period of time, then how are you going to get thousands? How are you going to get millions? And the analogy that I always sort of bring back to this is I remember back when I believe I was a freshman in high school and my math teacher asked me, do you want $1 million or do you want a penny that gets doubled every single day? And like everyone raised their hand for $1 million because we didn't understand what compound interest was. But if you double a penny over 30 days, I believe it's over $1 million. And then if you continue to do it, it's a crazy amount and it doubles and it's absolutely insane. That's the concept that you want to think about with podcasts. You don't want to take that big viral hit at the beginning. You want to grow consistently because so in the long run, you end up lasting way, way longer. Now, if you have questions about anything, feel free to reach out. I have the chat on the right-hand side, so if you guys are chatting, I can see it. But moving on to the next one where we're talking about social media. Again, Ben, I believe, is going to be doing a great job of covering this, so I don't want to dive too deep into it. But basically, I feel like a lot of this audience is going to be at least watching Gary Vee or know who he is. And if you know who he is, you know that he produces a crap ton of content. I think he produces, 20 to 50 pieces of content every single day across all social medias. You aren't Gary Vee. I thought that I was Gary Vee and I thought that I could keep up with him at the beginning when I first started. And I was like, oh, I need to do Instagram. I need to do Facebook. I need to do YouTube. I need to do LinkedIn. I need to do all these sort of different things. But I'm only one person. And there's no way that I can do all of that in a day, right? And make it all look good at the same time. Whether you're repurposing content or creating natively, it's almost impossible. And for you to put into perspective, Gary has a team probably now of like 25 people that their sole job is to produce content on his page. So whether it's Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever it may be, Gary has someone else that's producing the copy for him, that's editing the videos, that's recording the videos, that's doing all that. And yes, he might be the one that's pushing send or pushing post on that post and being the one that's actually engaging on it. But the content piece of creating it is usually not him. He's not the editor. He's not what D-Rock likes to call a predator. He's just the one that's producing it. And he's the character, essentially, of it. He's an actor, so to say, of his content. That's not to knock on Gary Vee. He produces great stuff, and I love his content. But you just can't compare yourself to someone who has a team of 20 people working under him. So you might be thinking, okay, so what do I do? If I can't post every single day on every single thing, what do I do? What you want to do is you want to start to test sort of different things all around the place. You want to take your one chunk of podcasts. Let's just say you have an interview podcast because that's sort of the general one that most people do. And you want to start to break it down into micro pieces and testing it onto different pages. So let's say you run a podcast that's geared towards fitness. Yes, Kenny says you automate the shit out of all of it. Yes, you can automate it. But the problem with automating is that you sort of lose that creative touch of it all and that personalization. And if you're just posting the same clip on Facebook, onto Instagram, onto LinkedIn, onto YouTube, yes, you might broaden your reach, but it's not necessarily gearing it specifically to that medium. So what I mean by that is your audience on LinkedIn is going to be different than your audience on Facebook, is going to be different from your audience on Instagram, is going to be different from your audience on Twitter. So something on LinkedIn will be usually spaced out. Every line is a space in between. That sort of seems to be what's working on LinkedIn. And then on Instagram, it's like you need a flashy picture that grabs someone's attention. Those first 30 characters or so are going to have to be super interesting to grab their content. Whereas on TikTok, it just has to be a video that encapsulates their mind for 5 seconds, right? And you don't really have much copy to play with. So yes, you can automate it. And I think that's a good way to sort of work around not necessarily having a team. But I think it's really tough to automate it really well. Samba asked, what about paying for that type of service? So I've never paid for any marketing service or any freelance or anything like that. But again, what I can say is people pay me to produce their content on LinkedIn. That's what I do as well. I'm a LinkedIn consultant. And it's really tough to find someone who's good enough to understand your brand and put it and create copy for it, if that makes sense. Think about it. If you're doing it for a personal brand, you're basically letting someone else control your personal brand. And if that person doesn't know exactly what your personal brand sounds like, is what they say, what you do, etc., then they can take and post something that's completely out of whack, and your audience will see it and be like, what post is this? This doesn't sound like me. That's why everything that you see from Gary is sort of in his tone of voice, and it makes sense no matter whether it's a video, whether it's a written post, whether it's a blog, etc. Like Gary does not write. He's gone out and said it. He's never written any of his books. He's ghost written his books, as well as a lot of his blog posts are ghost written as well. But the thing is, the copywriters that he works with are extremely good at what they do. And it genuinely sounds like Gary is writing everything that you see on Medium, everything that you've seen in his book, etc. And like I said, if you have that type of money to spend on someone that can really dive into and understand that voice, then great, do that. But for most people, especially just getting started out and you're just testing the podcasting platform to see if it's something that you would like, it's a really big cost at the very beginning. So what I would say is cut your content into small micro pieces, really figure out where your audience is at first. So again, going back to the fitness podcast, let's say you are a fitness one, LinkedIn might not necessarily be the best platform for what you want to do, because it's a very professional platform. Now, if you're doing fitness towards CEOs and C-executive levels, or maybe a lifestyle coach to that audience, that could be a platform for you. But let's just say you want a general audience. Instagram is probably going to be your best platform for podcast promotions. Same thing with maybe Pinterest, because it's very visual. And in the fitness industry, it's a very visual industry. For someone like myself, who my content is very geared towards the educational portion of life, it's not very Instagrammable, right? You can't make education that sexy, and it's really hard to compete with the Grant Cardones and the Ty Lopez's of the world that are saying you can get rich and look at my Lamborghini, look at my jet that I'm flying. I can't compete with that if I'm saying, hey, here's a 4-year degree. This is what you can end up doing if you optimize your resume right. So that doesn't necessarily do as well on Instagram, but it does extremely well on LinkedIn. And that's what we found. So that's why we put all of our effort on LinkedIn. We do have a Twitter page. We do have a Facebook page. We do have an Instagram page, just so that if people are on there and they search up GetChoGrindup, they can like and they can follow us. But we don't really produce much content on those platforms because the ROI on it doesn't necessarily make sense. So Shah asks, what aspect would you outsource since we can't do it all? What I would say, what you can outsource is, once you have a general layout of what you want to do, and in terms of the words that you want to say, your brand, create sort of a brand package. That's what it's called. If you don't know what that is, definitely Google brand package. It'll have things such as certain keywords that you always like to say, your brand message, your brand colors, etc., so that the people that are working on your content know exactly what to post in terms of how to brand your message. And then also outsource if you're doing video, the videography part. I don't know if that's a word, but that aspect of it. So for instance, someone reached out to me and asked if I could create video, and I'm not a huge video person, so I don't create the video, but he's literally just looking for someone to take the video. He wants to edit it because he likes the creative side of it, but he doesn't want to produce the video like actually be there holding the camera. So he's looking for someone to do that. Now, how does that tie back into what aspect you should outsource? Outsource whatever you don't necessarily like doing. And so that could be writing, that could be the editing, that could be the picture editing, etc. But I would say before you do all that, figure out a way to grow an audience on one specific platform, and then you can outsource the other platforms that aren't as important to your audience as much, and you can outsource it that way. All right, so the next one is SEO, the internet, right? SEO, how are we going to master the internet? Now, this is gonna be like a longer section because it really dives deep into how a podcast gets ranked onto iTunes. And I want to talk to you guys about some things that you'll see in terms of people claiming that they're top 100 podcasts in Apple. And it's a really interesting concept because a lot of these people will say, "Oh, I'm a top 100 podcast," right? You'll see it on LinkedIn. Go on LinkedIn and you'll see massive amounts of people claiming that, and then you'll go and look up their podcast, and they'll have like 2 reviews, and you're like, "Well, how do you have a top 100 podcast and you only have 2 reviews?" Well, the way that people will do it is they will call someone called a podcast promoter, and what these podcast promoters have is they have this network of people that will essentially just subscribe. You pay them a fee, like a $5 or $10 fee, and you just subscribe, or they will get all their friends to subscribe to your podcast. So like hundreds, if not thousands of people will subscribe to your podcast at once, but they won't listen to any of your episodes. So your listens and your downloads will stay exactly the same, but your subscription rate will go up exponentially. And iTunes views your subscription rate as the number one thing that they rank. So that's why you can bump up your podcast without anyone ever listening to your podcast and leave a review or anything like that. So that's something to be very skeptical about, especially when people are reaching out to you. When you start your podcast, people will reach out and say, "Hey, I have a top 100 podcast. Would you like to be on?" I always like to try and do my research first to see how credible they really are. If they have a website, do they have any reviews, what the reviews are saying, and anything like that. Because there are a lot of people that just use these sort of top 100 podcast type of things because they'll promote it, take a screenshot, and then they can put it on their LinkedIn profile, their Instagram page, or whatever it may be. And then all of a sudden they become a top 100 podcast, even though they might be getting, 25 or 50 listens every episode. So back to what you're probably thinking of, what really matters in terms of SEO. So your subscription rate matters, and I think it's over a 30-day span. So for instance, let's say if you get 100 subscribers at the very first day that you release your podcast, because you got all your friends and your family, your initial network to subscribe to your podcast. But after that, you got like 2 or 3 subs per day after that, you would rank pretty high because of that first initial bump of 100 subscriptions. But then let's say you're someone and you're getting a consistent 15 subs a day, even though after 30 days, you would have more subs than the person who got the 100 subs at the very beginning, your podcast probably wouldn't rank as high as the person number 1. And the reason for that is because of that 30-day span of, if you can consistently get bumps every 10 days into your sub box, then your podcast begins to rank higher and higher every single time. Don't ask me why Apple does this. That's just sort of how it works. And you can take that and use that in whatever way that you would like. But that's sort of how the biggest factor is in terms of how your podcast gets ranked. And that's the hardest thing when it comes to building a podcast, is discovery. Because unlike an Instagram where you have the discover page, or a YouTube where you have the YouTube algorithm that automatically generates podcast or like other videos on the side of your sidebar, podcasts don't really have a real discovery feature. And that's why you have to sort of really understand the SEO portion of it, because that's the only real discover is the top 100 charts. Like, yes, you can play in terms of hoping that someone searches how to get your first job or how to find a major or whatever it is. But the chances of someone searching that is very slim, because podcasting is just starting to blow up on the scene. Whereas on YouTube, since it's an established brand and people have known about YouTube for like 10 or 15 years now, it's become more of a search engine, whereas podcasts will get there eventually, but I think it's going to take another 5 or 10 years before it becomes that. So next thing that I'm going to talk about is number of reviews. This is important as well. This is the second one, because if you have a large subscription rate, but then people come to your podcast and again, they don't see any reviews, they might be a little sketched out about who is this Justin guy? What is this GetChoGrindup podcast? It's a weird name. I'm not going to listen to it because there's no real credibility behind it. That's where this whole concept of borrowed credibility comes from, of you need to find other people, whether they're big name or not, to just give you reviews on your podcast, because that makes sure that people, when they land on your page, they understand what your podcast is about. Think about when you're shopping on Amazon, right? Are you going to buy that item that has 10 reviews, or are you going to buy that item that has 1,000 5-star reviews? Probably the one that has 1,000 5-star reviews, even though they might be the same product. Just because you see that big number of 1,000 reviews right next to their name, you're like, if 1,000 people have used it and 1,000 people are willing to go out of their time to write a review for this, then it probably means that it's something decent. And I trust it a little bit more than the one that has 10 reviews. And that game of trust is what you need to play on when it comes to really winning that person over in that 30 seconds of when they land on their page. The last one is keywords in your descriptions. So in your podcast description, you have some characters to play around with. It depends on which podcast hosts that you have. Like I believe when I was on Podbean, I had like 150 characters to play with. But when I was on Anchor, I had like 600 characters to play with. So it really depends on which platform you host your podcast on. But you need to really keyword optimize that. And if you don't necessarily know what keywords are or how to optimize your keywords, there's numerous of videos on there. Just look up SEO or search engine optimization, and then Google Console and Google Search Engine and Google Trends will sort of be your best friends when it comes to finding the keywords that people are actually looking for. And then how can you incorporate that into a really nice keyword dense description? Does anyone have any questions about like SEO? Well, that was my Google Home. So if you guys heard that, sorry about that. So to kind of go over everything as a whole, when you're going over trying to figure out your first listeners, you want to create a fire podcast. And the only way to figure out if you have a great podcast is by testing. And that's by asking your friends, family, network, and other. So we've got a couple questions coming in, and then I'll go over the first listeners. So first one is slightly off topic. Do you recommend Anchor? So that's from Sambo. That's a great question. So Anchor is a great place to get started with. And what I mean by that is, unless you know that you're going to be producing a very highly produced podcast and you're going to be getting a lot of views off the very beginning and you're looking to generate revenue off of it, then you might be wanting to use the other platforms such as a Podbean or Libsyn, etc., because they have a little better of analytics. But if you're someone who's just getting started with podcasting and you don't necessarily know what you want to do with it and you're just trying it out, I think Anchor is a great place to do it, because you don't have to worry about trying to figure out how to upload it onto iTunes, how to upload it onto Spotify, Google, etc. Anchor just does it all for you. They make it very seamlessly. You just literally have to upload your audio to it, and then bang, it kind of happens. The downside to Anchor is that you don't get to choose three, forget what's the specific word for it, but I'm just going to use three topics to put your podcast under. So what I mean by that is when you're looking under sections on podcasts, there'll be like education, business, lifestyle and fitness, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. On Anchor, you're only allowed to choose one, and you're only allowed to choose one subset of that. Whereas on other platforms, you can choose up to 3. And if you're able to choose up to 3, then that helps your SEO purposes. But again, if you're just getting started, then Anchor is, I think, the best platform to get started. It's free, and it's categories. That's the word. Thank you, Mulaney. It's free, and I have no real problems with Anchor other than the not being able to upload it to more than one category at a time. So the next question is from Ian. Any insights or thoughts on analytics in Spotify and Google Podcasts? Do they differ from iTunes and Apple Podcasts? Let me get a sip of water and then I'll answer that. So the thing about analytics and podcasting is it's very hard to trust the analytics that you actually see. Many times, if you're getting analytics directly from your podcast host, many times it has been rumored. Again, I have no real confirmation, but just looking at like podcast forums and all the research that I've done into it, that many of the podcast hosts will boost up your downloads and your listens just because they want you to stay on the platform. Not necessarily sure how true or how false that is, but that is something that I've seen consistently throughout the past 2 or 3 years that I've been podcasting for. And then when it comes to platform-specific podcast analytics, such as Google Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, and iTunes, there is no real definition of what a download is, as well as what is a listen. So, for instance, Apple can consider a listen as someone who's listened to your episode for 25 seconds, whereas Spotify can count it as someone who's listened to your episode for 1 minute. And because, again, that's a big time difference, that's a 30-second time difference, that can lead to varying analytics per platform. So analytics and insights on podcasts are very sort of up in the air. They can give you a general sort of consensus of who is listening to your podcast. But the best advice that I have for someone, especially if you're looking at how well your promotions are doing, is always use like a link, like a bit.ly link or a smart link that you can actually track how many people have clicked on it. I think that's a better indicator of how many people might be actually listening to your podcast than by just going off of what your podcast host or your podcast platform is just giving you as analytics. Again, because there's no real regulations or anything like that, it's not like a YouTube where YouTube tells you exactly how many views you have, or Instagram tells you how many exact impressions that you've had, and they have real definitions of what a list, what an impression or what a view is on those platforms. Podcasting, the definition of a listen versus a download on on all these different sort of platforms varies. So it's very tough to get actual real analytics on how well or how bad your podcast is actually doing. So I hope that answers your question, Ian. I know it's not necessary. It's probably not the best answer the answer that you're looking for, but that's sort of the research that I've seen when it comes to figuring out how many listens and how many downloads your podcast is actually getting. Again, if you have any questions about any of this stuff, feel free to write it down in the chat. I only have a few more slides left, but I want to answer as many questions as possible. Mulaney asks, what do you think of running ads on podcasts, and how do you suggest seeking sponsors whose message fits your platform and audience? Thank you. That's a great question. So I've never run ads on my podcast just because I don't have a huge audience that it makes sense to create to make money off of podcasting in terms of ads. And I don't have an audience that wants to buy high-end products, so that being an affiliate wouldn't really necessarily be the best ROI as well. So what I mean by that, affiliate marketing is great if you have an audience that's looking to buy high-ticket items. So for instance, let's say someone comes to you that wants to promote their $1,500 conference. And if you promote it on your podcast, every person that buys a ticket from your link, you get a percentage of that. 10% of $1,500 is $150. That's a great piece of income. Whereas my audience is mainly students, so they're probably not going to buy a conference ticket for $1,500. So I also don't feel right marketing to students like a high ticket product like that, because they're probably already in student debt anyway. So it doesn't necessarily fit my audience. But if you have the audience that's willing to purchase that high ticket item, then affiliate marketing is something that you can really look into. Now, when it comes to just running general ads, what you'll hear is, I believe it's called the CPM. It's cost per milli. And so what it is cost per milli, and milli means 1,000. So generally what the CPM on podcasts is anywhere between $10 to $30 per 1,000 downloads or listens. So if you're trying to make a full-time income, that's a lot of downloads per month that you need to make. So for instance, let's just make a general assumption. Let's just say you want to make $4,000 a month on podcasts, and you have a really good CPM of $30 per 1,000 downloads. So you would need 133,000 downloads every single month to make $4,000. Now that's a lot of downloads. Yes, you can technically produce 1,000 episodes, and you would only need 133 people per episode or downloading it per episode. But 1,000 episodes in a month is kind of outrageous, and you'd probably just be spamming your audience anyways, and they probably wouldn't like that. But again, let's just say if you wanted that 133,000 downloads and you produce 2 episodes a week, so 8 in a month, you would need. I think I might have done that wrong. So let's see. If I do 4,000 divided by 30 times 1,000, and then divided by 8. So you would need almost 17,000 downloads per episode over 8 episodes in a month to make $4,000 a month off of ads. Now, if you have the audience that's willing to do that, full out, albeit, but I think at the beginning, people get a little annoyed with ads. So it could be really tough to sort of talk about maybe whether you're promoting, I don't know, Butcher Box or Amazon, whoever it may be, right? It could be a great value add if you think it really fits your audience. But I think at the beginning, I wouldn't necessarily run ads. I would use that 1 minute, that 30 seconds to 1 minute segment at the beginning of your podcast to educate your viewers a little bit more about what your podcast is about. So if you listen to the Declassified College podcast that I have, the first minute is a brief intro about what the podcast does, because since we're just getting started with it, we want people to really understand what the podcast is about. So rather than just jumping into it, and we don't necessarily have that brand recognition up front, we wanted to educate the customer, for lack of better words, the listener, a little bit more about the podcast, so that hopefully they stay on and they subscribe and maybe they leave a review later on. Hopefully that answers your question. But yeah, thank you. And then so Samba says, I'd say have affiliate links on your website instead. Yeah, you can have affiliate links onto your website too. The problem that I've seen is that you can't necessarily go from podcast to website, if that makes sense. You could go from, let's say you're promoting your podcast on Instagram. You could technically put your link to your website that you have your podcast on, and that's where you could have affiliate links right there. But the problem with that is it's really hard to get people moving from platform to platform, right? You've seen it. You can see it with a lot of big YouTubers. It's really tough to get a YouTube audience to move onto Twitter, to follow you on Instagram, etc. The same thing goes if you're trying to move people from platform to platform and trying to convert them. You're always going to lose people as it goes. So affiliate links do work on your website, but I think to make a good amount of income when it comes to affiliate links, I think you need to be having a high ticket price item, and you need to be having an audience that's looking to buy that high ticket item. So Mulaney just said, let me read that real quick. Whose platform I'm totally in awe, but I have never come across that person connected on social media as a creator. I'm selfish. So. Do you suggest using gathering whole approach? Most of my listeners, or what ways do you suggest engaging them? So from that question, Mulaney, does that mean that your listeners are sort of spread out all over the place and you're trying to figure out what's the best way to engage with them? Or do you not necessarily just know how to engage with them? Sorry about the delay. This is always the interesting part about streaming, right? But I really appreciate you guys coming on and listening to me talking about the first listeners. So maybe you guys become our first listeners for the Declassified College podcast. So if you do want to listen to that, just Google, Facebook, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever it is, Declassified College, and then we can connect and listen to that. So they're all over the place. Okay, so when it comes to people being all over the place, this is what I've learned through my years of content creation is you can have a Facebook audience, an Instagram audience, a YouTube audience, etc., but you don't necessarily know if they're all the same people. The best way to try to figure that out is to move them onto email. And the reason that's important is because Facebook, technically, even though they don't necessarily look like it, Facebook could shut down tomorrow. Instagram could shut down tomorrow. YouTube could shut down tomorrow. But your email list is always going to be yours. And email is probably going to be the last thing to shut down because it's not just one company, if that makes sense. So moving it into an email list, that's the best way to get everyone in one spot. And then you can just send out a weekly newsletter or a daily newsletter, whatever sort of fits your schedule to promote your podcast that way. And then your users can actually email you back to talk about the podcast. Whereas on, let's just say, a Spotify or an Apple, there's no real interaction between the podcast host and producer and then the podcast listeners. There's only the review, but the podcast host can't really reply back to that. Whereas if you send an email, you can have one-on-one conversations that way. So Kenny says, I agree. It's hard to get people to take advantage of affiliate links, but it's the best you can do if you're looking to make a few dollars. If you're new, building an audience first, then selling ads based on brand, then sell ads based on brand awareness. We do 115K downloads per month, and doing any affiliate marketing doesn't generate enough revenue for the time we put into creating the ad insertion. We sell based on CPM for standard advertising. Yeah, I think if you have an audience the size of Kenny's, if you're getting hundreds of thousands of downloads every single month, it's probably better for you to go the CPM route versus the affiliate link. But if you're starting off small, I personally think the affiliate link will probably be better for you in terms of making more money. And the reason I think that is, again, if you're going for the high ticket item, it only takes one sale to make that $150. Just again, let's just use the $1,500 example. It takes you one sale to make $150. Whereas in terms of downloads, what that would take you, if you had a $10 CPM, that would take you, I'm really bad at math now, I'm sorry guys. If you want to make $150, that'd take you 1,500 downloads. So, yeah, 1,500 downloads. Correct my math if I'm wrong. I'm sorry, I'm Asian, but I left all my math skills back in college. But I think it would take you 1,500 downloads. And that might not necessarily seem a lot, but at the very beginning when you're just getting started, it could be really tough to get that big of an audience to generate that consistent $150 year or month over month, essentially. But if you do have that 115K downloads per month, then that is beautiful. And just use that residual income that's coming off of your CPM. Kudos to you. And that's amazing. Okay. So I want to run through the rest of the slide that I have here of social media, which is the way that you want to think about it is short, sweet, and then you want to promote your brand and you want to keep your brand solid over all your social media platforms. So same colors, same text, same verbiage, same font, etc. You want to use all of that. And then the internet, which is the last one, is you want to perfect your SEO so that people find you and you have to stop looking for people. And the way you do that is by really finding keywords as well as getting people to subscribe and leave you reviews. So that helps you grow over the time. So again, this is my last slide. Feel free to continue to ask questions. We have like 13 more minutes. But if you want to stay connected with me, LinkedIn is my main platform. I don't really use Instagram or Twitter that much. So that's the link to my LinkedIn, the website where you can find everything that we're doing with Get Your Grinder related, as well as the podcast. And then the Declassified College podcast link is right there. And then the last but not least is if you want to get these slides that I just talked about, feel free to use that link. Just type it into your bar, and then there's a quick little survey that you'd have to fill out just so I can get some feedback and see what I can do better, what I can do, what I've been doing bad, and everything sort of like that. So I can get some feedback, and then I'll give you guys, I can send the slides over later today. So Cornell asks, what's the best approach to take when consolidating listeners into an email list? So first thing that I would do is just ask ask people to join your email newsletter. So just having like a bit.ly link that where you have a form and you're just asking for the email, that's where you'll get probably your most loyal people, because they're more than happy to give their email away to you and they want to stay in touch with you consistently through email. Another way to grow it is by giving away a free piece of content. So I think the person that was presenting before me was talking about it briefly. I didn't see his whole talk, but I'm assuming if he's talking about sales, that's what he's talking about. But for instance, for me, if I wanted to generate more email leads and to grow my newsletter, what I would do is create like a 5 tips to optimizing your resume sort of white paper, and then throw some Facebook ads behind, Facebook ad money, maybe just like $5 a day. And then I'll start to generate an email list from there, because that'll lead them to like type in your email to get this this white paper into your email inbox. And then so that's sent to them, you get the email, and then you can retarget your marketing that way. When it comes to just, I think the best approach is just sending people messages. So if you're on Instagram, if you have a ton of followers, it could take a lot of time, but generally just sitting down and taking an hour every day and just sending them messages saying, hey, my name's Cornell. I'm running this podcast. I'm looking to start this podcast, and we're looking for the best way to promote it. Would you be open to sharing us your email so that we can keep you in the loop every week when we talk about this podcast? We won't be spamming you, yada, yada, yada. And you'd be surprised at how many people actually look at those and how many people would actually respond to that. But that's what I do on LinkedIn. I try to send like 25 to 35 messages every single day, just talking to students and asking them to take a listen to the podcast. And that just steadily grows the audience that way. So I think that's the best way to approach these. Either you throw some money behind Facebook ads to get your word out there, or just generally just going through the DMs, whether it's LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, whatever it may be, and just asking people to would they be open to listening to your podcast, and then giving you some feedback that way. So Katie asks, how do you suggest building your email list? We just created ours and pushing it on social. We have the option on our website to submit their email. So Katie, literally the same exact thing that I just talked about of using Facebook and Instagram ads. I think that's probably your cheapest way right now, is just creating like a white paper when it comes to like whatever your podcast topic is about. So if it's fitness, 5 tips to getting a 6-pack, or 6 tips to getting a 6-pack, or if you're doing something that's geared towards professionals, like 5 steps to taking the next step in your career, whatever it may be. Like, I think that's the best ways to go about it, because people will genuinely click that link, give you your email, and or give them their email, and then you can add that to your email list, and then you can kind of go from there in terms of how you want to email market and everything like that. Yeah, that's what I've been doing for my email newsletter. And then I just launched a LinkedIn course to show people how to build their brand, their personal brand on LinkedIn. And that's what we've been doing. We've been testing some things for that, and that's what we're looking to sort of roll out in the next couple of weeks with me and my partner with that. So yeah, I think Facebook and Instagram ads is probably going to be your cheapest way to get that email list. Does anyone else have any other questions? I think we have a few more minutes left.
Hey, Justin.
Hey, what's going on?
Hey, yeah, thanks so much for the incredible talk. I think it's been very engaging. A lot of people, hopefully everybody found this useful. It's such an important first step, is to find your first listeners. So a lot of great stuff there. Thank you so much for coming on. We've got another session at 4:00 where Ben, I guess, will do a lot of continuation off of the stuff you talked about. And then Debbie's going to be talking about a little bit more about the business side of things. And then we'll be ending the day with Jordan. But I think that wraps it up for this session. So just for everybody else that's still here, first of all, just virtual round of applause for Justin. Thank you for coming on. Thanks for all this wisdom. This has been really, really helpful.
Thank you all. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, this is really great. And so what's going to happen next is we're actually going to go into the networking session. So if you guys want to take a quick break, that's what we'll be doing for about the next hour. At 4 o'clock, we're going to be kicking off again with our next talk, which is Benjamin Levitt. He's going to be talking about how to leveraging social media specifically. Justin touched on it a little bit. We're going to be going a lot more deep with Ben's talk. And so grab some food, chill out, grab some water, hang out. And then I highly recommend exactly in about 8 minutes, Jay from Descript is going to be doing a live demo of Descript, which is this incredible audio editing software for editing your podcast. It's pretty groundbreaking. Justin, have you heard about Descript?
I have not. No, I saw that email that you sent the other day, and I was looking to learn a little bit more about it.
Yeah, it's really cool. So basically, every time I talk to podcasters, I can't help but rave about Descript. They completely reimagined what audio editing looks like. Instead of, what do you use? Audacity, GarageBand?
I use GarageBand, yeah.
GarageBand, classic. It's a great beginner tool for sure. Descript, what they essentially do is, instead of editing audio waves, they thought, what if editing audio was as easy as editing text? And so everything you say automatically gets transcribed. And so what you have on front of you isn't like all these different like squiggly lines. It's just a block of text. And so if you need to delete a sentence, you just delete the sentence and it deletes the audio that's associated with it. So really cool. So if you find yourself spending a lot of time editing audio,
I'll save a lot of time.
And it will probably cut your editing time in half. So Jay's going to be doing a live demo just in a few minutes. I'll put the link for the Zoom in the chat. Thank you everybody for coming out to this talk. For the networking also, if you want to collaborate with other people, if you want to find other people you can exchange value with, find collaborators, find guests, go into the networking and just hit start networking and you'll get matched up with other attendees. I will also be there and that's where we'll actually be distributing our second raffle. Again, if you haven't heard already, we're doing four raffles, 3 $25 Amazon gift cards, and then we're also giving out a full year of Descript, the producer plan, to one lucky winner. So we already have our first winner for the Amazon $25 Amazon gift card, which is Katie DeFiore. Katie, if you're in the audience, congratulations. We'll reach out after the conference. We have 3 more winners throughout the day, so stay tuned. Again, we have a lot of cool stuff at for the rest of the day. So with that, we'll take an hour break. Thank you again, Justin. This was really awesome.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
And everybody, go take a break, start networking, and we'll be back here with Ben at 4 o'clock p.m. Eastern time. See you then.
See you guys. Peace.